She hated this. She hated the idea of sitting across from a stranger, pretending to be open to the possibility of connection, of being seen in a way no one ever really saw her. Maybe that was the point. Maybe that's why her best friend had insisted. But Juliet was tired. Tired of dating apps, tired of awkward first impressions, and especially tired of the way people always looked at her like she was too much or not enough all at once. She wasn't soft-spoken. She wasn't dainty. She didn't flutter her lashes or speak in a melodic tone or try to appear smaller than she was. She was solid, sharp, and unshakably herself. "I'm not the kind of woman people date," she had said flatly when her best friend pushed the idea of a blind date. "I'm the kind people admire from a distance or get intimidated by up close. But not the kind they call the next day." Her friend had laughed. "Exactly. That's why you need this. No expectations. No pressure. Just someone new who hasn't already put you in a box." So here she was, in a dim, amber-lit restaurant with too many empty tables and too much space for silence. She sat at a two-top by the window, nursing a glass of red wine and staring at the clock above the bar. 8 minutes late. Classic. She pulled out her phone to text an excuse to leave when she saw someone step into the room like they belonged to it. Her. Tall, unrushed, with an open coat framing a black blouse tucked into dark jeans, her hair tied loosely back and a hint of rain still clinging to the curve of her jaw. And she was looking directly at Juliet. Not scanning. Not hesitating. Just walking straight toward her, with a look that said she knew exactly who she was here for. Juliet's fingers froze on the screen. "Hi," the woman said, stopping beside the table, her voice smooth but low, like a secret you lean in to hear. "Are you Juliet?" There was a small pause before Juliet nodded. "And you must be?" "Tessa." She smiled, slowly, sincerely. "Sorry I'm late. Traffic was hell, and I didn't want to show up rushed and out of breath." She slid into the seat across from Juliet, as if she belonged there, as if she hadn't just upended the dull quiet of Juliet's evening with one look. Juliet blinked. "It's fine. I was just about to leave, actually." "Well, I'm glad you didn't. That should have been awkward." But it wasn't. Not the way Tessa said it. Not the way she tilted her head slightly, studying Juliet as though there were things she already liked about her. "You don't look like you want to be here," Tessa added, not unkindly. "I don't," Juliet admitted. "I don't usually do this. Blind dates. People." Tessa smiled again. "I don't either. But I was told I'd regret it if I didn't meet you." Juliet huffed a laugh. "Same." And then something shifted. Slightly. Softly. As if the tension that had built into the back of her neck began to unravel. Tessa was easy to talk to in the way that made Juliet almost suspicious. She didn't ask invasive questions. She didn't try too hard to impress. She simply talked about the music playing in the background, the ridiculous wine list, the way she thought the candles on the table were trying too hard. And when she asked Juliet a question, she actually listened. That alone made Juliet want to say more than she should. "So," Tessa said, sometime after the second glass of wine, "what do you do when you're not being forced into uncomfortable social experiments by well-meaning friends?" Juliet smiled. "I restore antique furniture." Tessa raised a brow. "Seriously?" "Yeah. I work with a small team. Sanding, refinishing, reconstructing pieces from old estates. I like bringing things back to life." "That's," Tessa leaned back, eyes fixed on her, "incredibly sexy." Juliet coughed, not expecting that. "What?" "It is. Hands-on, patient, detail-oriented. You touch what other people throw away and give it purpose again. That's hot." Juliet stared at her, unsure whether to laugh or hide. No one talked to her like that. Not without a smirk or a joke to soften it. But Tessa didn't flinch. She meant it. And that truth made Juliet's stomach twist in the most confusing way. "What about you?" Juliet asked, needing to shift the spotlight. "What do you do?" "I'm a ceramicist." "A what?" "I make pottery. Clay. Kills. Mud and fire and form. I've got a little studio behind my place." "Wow." "It's messy. Meditative. and it gives me an excuse to be barefoot most days. Juliet laughed. And it wasn't the guarded kind she gave strangers. It was the rare one. The one that started in her chest. Tessa leaned in slightly. You're not what I expected. Neither are you. Is that a bad thing? Juliet shook her head, eyes not leaving hers. Not even a little. They sat in that silence for a moment. A comfortable, charged quiet that made Juliet suddenly aware of how close their knees were beneath the table. You still want to leave? Tessa asked, her voice a notch lower. Juliet looked at her wineglass, then at the rain sliding down the window behind Tessa, then back to her eyes.
No.
I don't. And just like that, a spark caught. Not an explosion. Not lightning. But a warm, glowing ember that refused to die out. Juliet still didn't know if she was the kind of woman people dated. But as she watched Tessa watch her, unblinking, curious, almost reverent, she thought maybe, just maybe, she was the kind of woman someone could fall for. Juliet didn't know what exactly had shifted between them, but she felt it. It lingered under her skin like warmth from a fire that hadn't gone out. The date had ended late, later than she'd expected. No dramatic gestures, no lingering kiss. Just a hug at the door of the restaurant, slow and reluctant, and a look that held her still for several seconds before they parted ways. Tessa had simply said, "Let me know if you want to do this again," with a softness in her voice that Juliet couldn't shake for the rest of the night. And now, 4 days later, Juliet was staring at her phone like it owed her an answer. She hadn't texted. Neither had Tessa. Maybe that was the moment's magic, fleeting, delicate. Or maybe Juliet was afraid. Because the way Tessa had looked at her wasn't casual. It wasn't flirtatious or playful or superficial. It was reverent. And Juliet didn't know what to do with that. She had dated before, yes, but always with a buffer. Always guarded. This, whatever this had been, felt like being fully seen, and it terrified her. Which was why, when her phone buzzed with Tessa's name lighting up the screen, Juliet dropped it like it was on fire. The message was short. There's a craft fair this Saturday in Eastwood Park. Handmade art, ugly knitwear, overpriced cider. Come with me? Juliet stared at it, smiled, and typed back, ugly knitwear? Hard to resist. Tessa responded instantly. That's what I thought. I'll pick you up at 11? The day was overcast but dry, the air crisp with late autumn. Tessa showed up in a thick burgundy scarf and a leather jacket worn at the edges, her hair down this time, wind-blown and gorgeous. Juliet, despite herself, felt a flutter of something, excitement or nerves. She wasn't sure. Tessa's car smelled faintly of clay and coffee, and the radio played soft instrumental jazz, which somehow made Juliet feel like she'd stepped into someone else's life. You look good, Tessa said as they pulled away, not glancing over, just saying it like it was the most obvious truth. Juliet swallowed. So do you. I wore the scarf to impress you. Did it work? It's working right now. Juliet looked out the window, smiling quietly, heart thudding against her ribs. The craft fair was sprawling, chaotic, and somehow charming in its mess. Booths of hand-woven blankets, absurdly shaped candles, local honey, and artisan dog biscuits filled the park. Music played from a small stage. Kids ran around with face paint and warm cider. And Tessa kept brushing against Juliet's arm, not quite holding her hand, but staying close enough that Juliet felt the pull of her presence in every movement. At one booth, Tessa bought Juliet a pair of small, hand-thrown ceramic earrings. You don't have to, Juliet began. I want to, Tessa said simply. They reminded me of you. A little imperfect.
Solid.
Beautiful. Juliet blinked. You think I'm beautiful? Tessa turned to her fully, eyes calm and serious.
Yes.
In a way that makes people nervous. And in a way they remember. Later, they sat on a bench with hot cider and paper-wrapped pastries. Tessa leaned back, one ankle resting on the opposite knee, completely relaxed. Juliet, on the other hand, was very aware of every inch between them and how much she wanted to close it. You're easy to be around, Juliet said, surprising herself. I usually hate this kind of thing.
People. Crowds.
but with you it's easier. Maybe because you don't have to perform, Tessa replied gently. You don't have to shrink or adjust yourself. I like you as you are. Juliet turned her face slightly, but not before Tessa caught the blush rising in her cheeks. Then, after a long pause, Juliet asked, "Why did you agree to the blind date?" Tessa tilted her head. "Because I was told you were difficult, stubborn, independent, and emotionally guarded." Juliet laughed. "And that made you want to meet me?" "Absolutely." "Why?" "Because people like you aren't boring. And because I've been all those things too." There was a silence then, deep and full of quiet understanding. Juliet's heart beat faster. They drove back as the sky turned golden. When Tessa walked her to the door, Juliet hesitated. "Do you want to come in?" she asked, softly, not quite looking at her. Tessa didn't move. "Not yet." Juliet met her eyes, confused. "Why not?" "Because what we're building, deserves space to breathe. And because I don't want to rush something that already feels this rare." Juliet stared at her. No one had ever said something like that to her before. No one had seen her, wanted her, and still chosen patience over impulse. Tessa stepped forward, slowly, and brushed her fingers lightly along Juliet's jaw. "But I do want to kiss you," she murmured. "May I?" Juliet didn't answer. She just nodded. And when Tessa kissed her, gently, reverently, like Juliet was something precious, Juliet felt herself melt into it. It wasn't a kiss full of hunger or heat. It was soft, measured, a promise whispered through contact. And when Tessa pulled back, her forehead rested lightly against Juliet's. "You're not the kind of woman people date," she said, echoing Juliet's own words. "You're the kind they fall for." Completely. Juliet's breath caught. Her fingers curled into the front of Tessa's jacket. And just like that, she didn't feel unlovable anymore. The kiss stayed with her. For days. Juliet could still feel the soft press of Tessa's lips, the gentle way she'd rested her forehead against hers afterward, like they'd shared something sacred. It wasn't just the kiss, it was everything surrounding it. The patience, the restraint, the quiet certainty in Tessa's touch. No one had ever kissed Juliet like that before. Like she mattered. Like she wasn't just a moment or a phase or a curiosity, but something worth holding gently and intentionally. It terrified her. And it thrilled her. She kept looking at her phone again. Not out of desperation. No, Juliet had never been the kind of woman to chase. But now, she was beginning to understand something her walls had never allowed. Wanting didn't have to mean weakness. So when Tessa texted her, "I want to show you something this weekend. Are you free?" Juliet didn't hesitate. Yes. Saturday came cloaked in gray skies, the kind Juliet normally disliked. But with Tessa waiting in her car outside Juliet's apartment, those clouds felt like a soft blanket rather than a storm. Tessa was smiling as she got in. "Still trusting me with your weekends?" she teased. Tentatively, Juliet smirked. "You haven't earned full custody yet."
Fair.
"Maybe this will help." They drove out of the city, past the highway, through winding roads that opened into a quiet stretch of countryside. "Where are we going?" Juliet asked. "To where I breathe best," Tessa said simply. They arrived at a small, weathered cabin nestled among trees whose leaves were beginning to turn. Hey, if you're enjoying this story, go ahead and drop a like to help us grow even more. And let me know in the comments, on a scale from 0 to 10, what score would you give this story so far? Your feedback makes all the difference. There was a wraparound porch, a hammock tucked between two birches, and a chimney already letting out wisps of smoke. "You live here?" Juliet asked, stunned. "Part-time. When I need to think. Or when the city feels too loud." "It's beautiful." "So are you," Tessa said, walking past her to unlock the front door, like it was the most casual truth in the world. Juliet stood frozen for a second, heart kicking in her chest. Inside, the cabin was warm, scattered with handmade pottery, old books, thick blankets, and a stone fireplace that crackled with a gentle flame. It smelled of cedar and cinnamon, and something uniquely Tessa. "No one's ever brought me somewhere like this," Juliet said softly. It's always loud bars or restaurants. Or their apartment they pretend they clean regularly. This place isn't for everyone, Tessa replied, pouring tea into handmade mugs. But I wanted you to see it. They sat by the fire, close but not touching, wrapped in silence that felt comfortable rather than empty. I come here when I forget who I am, Tessa said eventually. When I need to remember that I'm allowed to slow down. That I don't have to be everything all the time. Do you forget often? More than I'd like. Juliet looked into the fire. I forget how to let people in. Tessa turned her head. But you're letting me in. Juliet met her eyes.
Yeah.
And it's terrifying. Tessa didn't reach out. She didn't try to fix it. She just nodded like she understood all too well. And that was enough. As the evening deepened, Tessa cooked a simple dinner, roasted vegetables, fresh bread, a bottle of wine she insisted Juliet open because you look like you could do it without making it explode. Juliet rolled her eyes and did exactly that. After dinner, they lay on the floor, heads side by side on a woven rug, looking up at the wooden beams above. You know, Tessa said, voice dreamy, I was ready to hate that blind date. Me too. I expected someone who'd talk about themselves too much, or who'd try to impress me with things they thought I'd like. And instead you got someone who tried to leave before you even arrived. Tessa laughed, turning her head to look at her. And I've been trying to get closer ever since. Juliet turned too, eyes catching Tessa's in the dim light. You make it hard to keep the walls up. Good, Tessa whispered. You don't need them with me. And then Juliet reached out. Slowly, fingers brushing against Tessa's hand on the rug. Tessa turned her palm upward and laced their fingers together without a word. They didn't kiss that night. Didn't need to. There was something more intimate in that simple touch. The way Juliet let herself fall asleep with Tessa's hand in hers, the fire crackling low beside them, and a sense of safety she hadn't felt in years. Tessa didn't ask for more. And that restraint, again, made Juliet want to give her everything. Juliet woke before the sun. The fire had died down to glowing embers, and the air in the cabin had cooled, but her hand was still warm, still wrapped in Tessa's. She hadn't let go in her sleep. That alone made Juliet's chest ache in a way she wasn't used to. It was unfamiliar, this kind of safety. Not the loud, dramatic kind full of declarations and promises, but the quiet kind. The kind that sat with you on a floor overnight and didn't ask for more than your presence. She turned her head slowly. Tessa was still asleep, lips parted slightly, her face soft in the faint orange light of morning. Juliet studied her. The faint smudge of clay in her hairline. The rise and fall of her breath. The small, barely there crease between her brows. She looked real, human, breakable. And that made Juliet feel something fierce and tender at once. She didn't move. She just stayed there, watching, hand in hand with someone who had somehow, impossibly, become a part of her. They spent the rest of that day tangled in softness. Nowhere to be, no schedule to obey. Breakfast was quiet, warm, filled with shared glances and the kind of conversation that didn't need to rush. Tessa let Juliet flip the pancakes, even though she burned the first one. I like that you're not perfect, Tessa said, reaching out to touch the flower on Juliet's cheek with her thumb. Says the woman with 5 matching ceramic bowls and a perfectly curated life, Juliet teased. Perfect is boring, Tessa whispered, still touching her. And Juliet couldn't help it. She leaned in and kissed her. This kiss was deeper. Not hesitant like the first. Not restrained. Still gentle, but with something more behind it. A want that was no longer shy. Tessa kissed her back with that same slow-burning intensity, one hand sliding behind Juliet's neck as if to hold her in place, to keep her right there. They kissed until the pancakes were cold. Neither of them cared. The drive back to the city was quieter. Not awkward, just thoughtful. Juliet rested her head against the window, fingers absently brushing the ceramic earrings Tessa had given her days earlier. Tessa reached over and placed her hand gently on Juliet's knee. Just rested it there. And Juliet covered it with her own. No words needed. The next few weeks unfolded like something Juliet didn't know she was allowed to have. There was no official start, no, so what are we? Moment. They simply kept choosing each other. Dinner at Juliet's apartment turned into breakfasts. Mornings became slower. There were stolen kisses in parking lots, text messages that turned into calls just to hear the sound of the other's voice, and moments of silence on the couch that felt fuller than any words. One night, after a long day at the shop, Juliet arrived at her apartment to find a small note taped to her door. It read, "Downstairs. Dress warm." Confused, she threw on a sweater and coat, and when she opened the door to the street, Tessa was there, leaning against her car, holding a thermos and 2 mugs. "What's this?" Juliet asked. "Come with me," Tessa smiled. They drove to the edge of the city, to a quiet overlook that faced the skyline. Tessa spread out a thick blanket on the hood of her car and poured hot cider into the mugs. "I thought we could celebrate," she said. "Celebrate what?" "You." Juliet blinked. "Why me?" "Because you've been showing up," Tessa said.
To this. To us.
"Even when it scares you." Juliet looked down at her cup, then back at the city lights. "You make it easier. You make it worth it." And then, under the night sky, wrapped in a blanket and warm cider and the hush of the world below, Tessa leaned in, her forehead pressed lightly to Juliet's. "I'm falling for you," she whispered. "And I don't want to pretend I'm not." Juliet's breath hitched. No one had ever said that to her. No one had ever made it sound like a truth instead of a trap. She didn't respond with words. She kissed her instead, slow, reverent, full of everything she was still learning how to say. Later, as they lay on the blanket staring up at the stars, Juliet whispered, "I'm scared." Tessa turned to her. "Of what?" "Of wanting this too much." "Then we'll want it together," Tessa said, pulling her closer. And Juliet closed her eyes, letting herself be held, letting the fear rest for once. It started becoming routine, but the kind Juliet had never known she could crave. Tessa leaving behind a sweater that Juliet pretended not to wear around the apartment. Juliet leaving handwritten notes inside Tessa's sketchbooks when she thought she wouldn't notice. A quiet closeness had built between them that didn't need constant validation. They just fit. Not perfectly, not without friction, but in a way that felt earned. Real. Juliet had never been in something like this. She didn't know what to call it, but it lived in the way her body relaxed when she heard Tessa's keys in the door, in the way her voice softened when she answered Tessa's calls, in the way her fingers instinctively sought Tessa's when they were close enough to touch. One evening, Juliet came home from a long day at the workshop, hair still dusted with wood shavings, boots heavy with exhaustion. She opened her apartment door and froze. The lights were dim, candles flickered on the table, and the smell of roasted garlic and something rich and savory filled the air. "Hi," Tessa called from the kitchen, wearing Juliet's apron and the most guilty smile she'd ever seen. "You cooked." Juliet blinked. "You never cook." "I know," Tessa laughed. "Which is why this might be the bravest thing I've ever done." Juliet walked in, dropping her bag with a soft thud. "Did you burn anything?" "Only the first pan." "That's a win." Tessa handed her a glass of wine, brushing a kiss to her temple. "Go wash up. Dinner's almost ready." And something about that moment, about coming home to someone who chose to be there, who made dinner not out of obligation but affection, made Juliet feel something crack open in her chest. After dinner, they ended up on the floor, as they often did, with the city humming softly outside the windows. Tessa lay on her back, Juliet curled beside her, head resting just under her collarbone. "This feels like a dream I didn't know I had," Juliet murmured, her voice almost lost in Tessa's shirt. "That makes 2 of us." Tessa gently ran her fingers through Juliet's hair, slow and calming. "I've never been good at this. The whole relationship thing." Juliet lifted her head slightly. "You seem pretty damn good at it to me." "That's because it's you." Tessa met her eyes. "I don't feel like I have to edit myself with you. You let me be all the messy parts, and you don't try to fix them. You just see them." Juliet reached up, tracing the edge of Tessa's jaw. "You make me want to be softer." "That's new for me." "I don't want you softer," Tessa said, taking her hand. I just want you open, and I'll give you every reason to feel safe doing that. Juliet's throat tightened.
She wasn't used to words like that.
Not ones that landed so cleanly in her chest. You say things like that, and then expect me not to fall apart right here on the floor? Fall apart, Tessa whispered, bringing Juliet's hand to her lips. I'll be here to catch every piece. Juliet leaned in and kissed her, this time deeper, longer, letting her walls melt into the heat between them. And when she pulled back, breathless, she rested her forehead against Tessa's and whispered, I think I'm falling for you too. Tessa smiled, wide and quiet and full of wonder. Then let's fall together. That night, for the first time, Juliet didn't wake up alone in her bed. She didn't reach for cold sheets or stare at the ceiling wondering why she always pushed people away. Instead, she woke to Tessa's arm wrapped tightly around her waist, her breath warm against the back of her neck, and the slow, steady beat of something that felt dangerously close to love. Juliet was getting used to waking up like this, blankets tangled between them, the soft weight of Tessa's arm draped over her stomach, the light sound of her breath tickling the back of her neck. It still felt unreal sometimes, like her body wasn't fully convinced that this softness, this closeness, belonged to her. But it did. And more than that, Tessa made it feel easy. Until the morning Juliet reached for her phone and saw the name on the screen. Isabel. One word. No last name. Just a text that popped up while Tessa was in the shower. Juliet didn't mean to look.
But she did.
We need to talk. You can't keep ignoring me.
Just that.
No context. But her stomach dropped anyway. She didn't mention it that morning. She tried to shake it off, tried to focus on the way Tessa smiled at her across the kitchen counter, on the way she slid a mug of coffee into Juliet's hands with that small, almost shy look she only wore when she was proud of something simple. But it lingered. That name, that text, that tone. And it only got louder when Juliet saw the way Tessa flinched slightly at her phone vibrating later that day. By the following weekend, Juliet couldn't pretend anymore. They were at Juliet's apartment, curled on the couch beneath a shared blanket, a movie playing in the background that neither of them was really watching. Tessa's phone buzzed again. This time, she reached for it quickly, too quickly. Juliet sat up. Isabel, she said quietly. Tessa froze. How long were you going to avoid telling me? Tessa closed her eyes, fingers tightening around the phone. She's my ex. I figured. She wasn't supposed to still be in my life. But she is. Not in the way you think, Tessa said, meeting Juliet's gaze. We ended things over a year ago. It was messy, controlling. She didn't want to let go. I finally walked away, and for a long time she disappeared. But now she's texting again.
Why?
Because she knows I'm seeing someone. Juliet's heart thudded hard. How does she know that? I don't know. Probably mutual friends. Or maybe she saw me with you. So, what does she want? To get under my skin. To remind me I used to be hers. Are you tempted to respond? Juliet's voice was steady, but her hands weren't. No, Tessa's reply was firm, immediate. Not at all. But I didn't know how to tell you without making it worse. I didn't want to bring her into this, into us. Juliet stood, walking toward the window, needing space to breathe. It's not about her being in your past, Tessa. Everyone has one. It's that you kept it from me. You saw the texts.
You deleted them.
You hid it. I didn't delete anything, don't lie. Okay, Tessa said quietly. I did. Because I didn't want her poison touching this. But it already has, Juliet whispered, arms crossed tightly. And now I'm wondering what else I don't know. Silence stretched between them, thick and raw. Tessa stepped forward. You know me. You know this. What we've built. I didn't lie about how I feel. I'm here. With you. Every day. I'm not going back to her, Juliet. I know that. Juliet turned to face her. But that doesn't make it easier. You should have trusted me with the truth. Tessa's face crumpled slightly. You're right. She took Juliet's hand. I'll do whatever it takes to make you feel safe again. I don't need perfect. I just need honesty. You have it. From now on. They stood in that silence, the air still heavy, but something shifted. Tessa didn't make excuses. Juliet didn't push her away. They stayed there, hands joined, not pretending the wound wasn't real, but choosing to heal it together. That night, they didn't curl into each other like usual. Juliet lay facing the wall for a long time, eyes open, thoughts spinning. But at some point in the dark, Tessa reached for her. Just her hand. Just her fingers brushing against Juliet's knuckles. Juliet didn't pull away. She let her grip tighten slowly, and eventually, she turned toward her. Not with a smile. Not with forgiveness, just yet. But with presence. With willingness. Sometimes love didn't look like candlelight and kisses. Sometimes it looked like staying through the tension. Like fighting for each other when it would be easier to run. Juliet thought she was prepared. She really did. After the conversation, after the honesty, after the quiet way they had chosen to stay instead of pulling apart, she believed the worst of it would live in texts and memories. She underestimated Isabel. The first time Juliet saw her in person, she didn't even realize who she was at first. They were at a small neighborhood market, one of those places Tessa loved because it sold local bread and handmade soap, and everything smelled faintly of citrus and herbs. Juliet was comparing jars of honey when she felt the shift in the air beside her, that subtle tension you only notice when someone enters your space with intention. "You must be Juliet," the woman said. Her voice was sweet, practiced, with a sharp edge hidden just beneath it. Juliet turned slowly. Isabel was beautiful in a way that felt deliberate. Perfect hair, perfect posture, a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She looked Juliet up and down, not rudely, but thoroughly. Like she was assessing something she already believed she understood. "I'm Isabel," she continued, extending a hand. "Tessa's ex." Juliet didn't take the hand. She didn't step back either. "I know who you are." Isabel smiled wider. "Of course you do." That was when Tessa appeared at Juliet's side, her body immediately tense. "Isabel," she said flatly, "what are you doing here?" "Shopping," Isabel replied innocently. "Am I not allowed to exist in the same city as you?" Her gaze flicked to Juliet again. "I was just curious. You've been a topic lately." Tessa's jaw clenched. "This isn't appropriate. Neither was the way you left," Isabel said softly, stepping closer. "But here we are." Juliet felt it then, not jealousy, not insecurity, but anger. Isabel wasn't here to reconnect. She was here to provoke, to destabilize, to remind Tessa of a version of herself she had fought to leave behind. "We're leaving," Juliet said calmly, slipping her fingers into Tessa's hand. Isabel's eyes narrowed just a fraction. "Of course you are," she said. "Run along. Enjoy the honeymoon phase. It never lasts with her." Tessa stiffened, but Juliet squeezed her hand tighter and pulled her away, refusing to give Isabel the satisfaction of another word. But Isabel didn't stop there. She showed up at Tessa's studio the following week, unannounced, leaning against the doorframe like she belonged there. "You always loved when I surprised you," she said, ignoring the way Tessa's face hardened. "You need to leave," Tessa replied. "You don't get to decide that," Isabel shot back. "This place? This life? I was here before." "And you made it unbearable," Tessa said, voice shaking despite herself. "I'm not that woman anymore." "No," Isabel smiled cruelly. "Now you're playing house with someone who doesn't even know what you're capable of." That night, Juliet felt the distance. Not because Tessa pulled away, but because the intrusion had shaken something deep inside her. They lay in bed, backs not quite touching, the space between them louder than any argument. "She wants to get in your head," Juliet said quietly. "She already has," Tessa admitted. "And I hate that it affects us." Juliet turned toward her. "It affects us because it matters. Because you matter." Tessa exhaled shakily. "I'm scared I'll lose you over this." Juliet reached out, resting her hand over Tessa's heart. "You won't. But I need to know you're choosing me. Even when she's loud. Even when it's hard." Tessa nodded, tears shining in her eyes. "I am. I choose you." The next time Isabel appeared, It was outside Juliet's workshop. That was the line. Isabel leaned against a post, arms crossed, lips curled into a knowing smile. "You're strong," she said to Juliet without preamble. "I can see why she's drawn to you." "This ends now," Juliet replied, stepping closer. "You don't get to intimidate me." "I'm not intimidating you," Isabel laughed softly. "I'm warning you. She leaves when things get real." Juliet didn't raise her voice. She didn't flinch. "You don't know her anymore. And you definitely don't know me." Isabel's smile faded. For the first time, something like uncertainty flickered across her face. "You think love makes you brave," she said. "It does," Juliet answered. "But boundaries make me stronger." She turned and walked away, heart pounding, knowing this wasn't over, but also knowing something else had changed. Isabel was no longer the shadow looming between them.
She was a test.
And Juliet wasn't going anywhere. Juliet had always believed there were lines people didn't cross. Invisible ones, maybe, but solid all the same. Boundaries that, once broken, changed everything forever. She learned that some people didn't see lines at all. Isabel proved that on a Tuesday afternoon, the kind of ordinary day that later felt poisoned in memory. Juliet was at the workshop, hands deep in sawdust, restoring the curved leg of an old oak table when her phone buzzed repeatedly in her pocket. She ignored it at first, then again, and again. Finally, irritated, she wiped her hands and looked. It was a message from a client she barely remembered working with months ago. "I didn't realize you were involved in that kind of drama. I need to cancel the commission." Juliet frowned, confused. Before she could respond, another message came in. Then another. Different numbers. Different names. All variations of the same tone.
Doubt.
Discomfort. Judgment. Her stomach tightened. She opened her email. There it was. An anonymous message sent not only to her clients, but to the workshop's shared mailing list. Screenshots. Half-truths. Carefully cropped images of Tessa and Juliet together. And a message dripping with suggestion rather than fact, implying unprofessional behavior, instability, emotional recklessness. Isabel hadn't attacked their love directly. She'd attacked Juliet's livelihood, her sense of safety, the thing she'd built with her own hands. Juliet felt cold. Not angry. Not yet. Just hollow. She left the workshop early, locking the door behind her with shaking fingers, and drove without knowing where she was going until she found herself parked outside Tessa's studio. She sat there for a long time, forehead pressed against the steering wheel, breathing through the ache in her chest. Tessa didn't know yet. Juliet knew that immediately. She knew because if Tessa had known, she would already be here, panicking, apologizing, trying to fix something that wasn't hers to fix. Juliet couldn't handle that. Not now. Tessa found out anyway. Isabel made sure of it. She showed up at the studio that evening, smug and unrepentant. "I warned you," she said lightly, watching Tessa's world fracture in real time as the emails loaded on her screen. "You don't get to destroy her life because you can't move on," Tessa snapped, shaking with rage. "I didn't destroy anything," Isabel replied. "I told the truth. Or, at least my version of it." Tessa threw her out. Literally, dragged her to the door and slammed it shut hard enough to rattle the shelves. Then she called Juliet. Over and over. Juliet didn't answer. When Juliet finally did speak to her, it was brief. Flat. Devastating. "I need space," she said quietly over the phone. "Please don't come over." "Juliet, please. I can't do this right now." Tessa's voice broke. "This wasn't your fault." "I know," Juliet whispered. "And that's what makes it worse." She hung up before Tessa could say anything else. The days that followed felt unreal. Juliet moved through them like she was underwater. She answered emails. She reassured clients. She rebuilt trust brick by brick, the way she always had. Alone. At night, she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her phone face down on the nightstand, resisting the urge to reach for the one person who made everything feel survivable. She missed Tessa in her bones. The way she laughed. The way she said Juliet's name like it was something precious. The way she held her like she wasn't too much or too sharp or too hard to love. But Isabel had poisoned that too. Every time Juliet thought of Tessa, she also thought of vulnerability, exposure,
Loss. She hated that.
Tessa didn't push. That hurt more than if she had. She sent one message. Just one. I'm here. I'll wait. No matter how long it takes. Juliet stared at it for a long time. Then she turned the phone off. Not because she didn't care, but because she cared too much. And for the first time since meeting Tessa, Juliet chose distance over desire. Not because she didn't love her, but because love, right now, felt dangerous. Tessa agreed to the date without thinking too much about it, which in itself felt like a warning sign she chose to ignore. It had been nearly 3 weeks since Juliet asked for space, 3 weeks of silence, so loud it rang in her ears at night. She told herself she wasn't trying to replace anything, wasn't betraying anyone, wasn't even hoping for something meaningful. She just wanted to feel normal again. Wanted to remember what it was like to sit across from someone without carrying the weight of longing in her chest. Riley seemed safe for that. Neutral.
Easy.
They met at a wine bar tucked between two quiet streets, the kind of place that prided itself on soft lighting and conversations that never got too deep unless you wanted them to. Riley arrived first, already seated, already smiling when Tessa walked in. She was attractive in a pleasant, uncomplicated way, her hair tucked neatly behind her ears, her posture relaxed, her attention immediately focused on Tessa. I'm really glad you came, Riley said, standing slightly as Tessa approached. Me too, Tessa replied, even though the words felt borrowed, like something she was supposed to say rather than something she felt. They ordered wine.
Talked about work.
Riley spoke easily, confidently, about her projects, her travels, the exhibitions she wanted to submit to next year. Tessa listened, nodded, asked questions at the right moments.
She was good at this.
She knew how to be charming, attentive, present. On the surface, everything looked fine. Riley laughed at Tessa's dry humor, complimented her hands, leaned in when she spoke. At one point, she reached across the table and let her fingers rest lightly against Tessa's wrist, a gesture that should have sparked something. Instead, Tessa felt nothing. No pull, no heat, no instinct to close the distance. Her body stayed still, polite, distant in a way that surprised her. She searched herself for even a flicker of interest, some small thrill she could build on. There was nothing. Just a dull awareness that she was going through motions she'd learned a long time ago. As the evening went on, Riley grew more comfortable, her touches lingering a second longer, her smile softening into something openly hopeful. You're quieter than I expected, she said gently. Not in a bad way. Just somewhere else. Tessa hesitated, swirling the wine in her glass. She considered lying. It would have been easy, but she was too tired for that. I didn't realize how far away I still am, she admitted. Riley studied her for a moment, not offended, not hurt, just observant. Someone still has you, she said. It wasn't a question. Tessa exhaled slowly. Yeah. Completely? Yes. Riley nodded, leaning back in her chair. That explains it. They sat in silence for a few seconds, the air between them calm but final. When Riley reached for the check, her movements were unhurried, accepting. You're not broken, she said kindly. You're just already in love. They parted outside the bar with a brief hug that felt more like a courtesy than a goodbye. Tessa walked home alone, the night air cold against her skin, her thoughts louder than the city around her. She realized then that it wasn't just that she didn't feel anything for Riley. It was that her body refused to open for anyone else. Every instinct she had was still tuned to Juliet, the way she spoke, the way she moved, the way she made silence feel safe instead of empty. Trying to recreate that with someone new hadn't just failed. It had clarified something painful and undeniable. This wasn't about timing, or fear, or unfinished business. This was love. And love, apparently, didn't care if it was inconvenient. That night, Tessa lay awake staring at the ceiling, not reaching for her phone, not drafting messages she wouldn't send. She didn't feel dramatic or heartbroken. She felt certain. And certainty, she realized, was sometimes heavier than hope. Juliet didn't know what she expected when she stepped inside the gallery. Maybe to feel like herself again. Maybe to feel nothing at all. The exhibit was small, intimate, the kind that focused more on presence than prestige. She walked slowly through the space, letting her eyes linger on pieces that didn't speak to her the way they once might have. Art used to ground her, used to open her. But lately, everything felt like looking at the world through glass. She was surrounded by beauty and couldn't feel a single piece of it. She paused in front of a sculpture, a curved ceramic figure, cracked intentionally down the center but fused back together with gold.
Kintsugi.
The art of honoring something broken by illuminating its fractures. And suddenly, she thought of Tessa's hands, the way they cupped her face like she was made of something that could shatter. She hadn't stopped thinking about her. She'd just gotten better at hiding it. From others. From herself. But the feelings never went anywhere. They waited. Quiet. Patient. And now they were loud again, blooming in her chest like something raw and unfinished. She hadn't read the letter in days. Not because she was done with it, but because it had become a part of her. Like breath. Like memory. She could recite it word for word, without opening it. I love you. Not the kind of love that fixes things, but the kind that stays. Juliet left the gallery early, the air outside colder than she expected. Her scarf scratched at her neck. Her hands ached from clenching them in her pockets. She walked until her feet hurt, no destination, just the ache of movement. That night, she couldn't sleep. She kept reaching for something that wasn't there. Tessa's voice. Tessa's warmth. Tessa's calm. She didn't text her. Not yet.
But she thought about it.
She even typed out the words once, stared at them for a long time, and then erased them one by one. She didn't know how to come back. Not because she didn't want to, but because returning meant being seen fully again. Without defenses. Without space to run. Tessa, meanwhile, had stopped pretending. After the night with Riley, after the final, quiet understanding that Juliet was still everywhere inside her, she stopped distracting herself. She stopped trying to fill the quiet. She let it echo, let it settle, let it teach her what it needed to. There were nights when she stared at the ceiling and whispered Juliet's name, not to bring her back, but to remember what it sounded like when said with love. And then, 10 days after the date she never should have gone on, 25 days after the last time she saw Juliet, her phone lit up. One name. One message. I've been thinking about the way you look at me. Tessa stared at it for a long time. Her hands trembled. Her breath caught in her throat. She didn't respond immediately. Not out of games or pride. But because she was afraid that if she moved too quickly, the moment might break. 5 minutes later, another message.
Can I see you?
Tessa replied with one word.
Yes.
They met 2 nights later. A public park near Juliet's apartment, half empty, lit by golden street lamps that cast long shadows on the pavement. Juliet was already there when Tessa arrived, sitting on a bench, fingers curled tightly in her coat sleeves. When she looked up, Tessa stopped walking. Just froze. Because it was her. Juliet. And she looked the same, but different. Softer in the eyes. More open in the way she held herself. And when their eyes met, it was like the entire city hushed. Juliet stood slowly. Hi. Tessa swallowed. Hi. Silence stretched between them, thick with everything unsaid. Then Juliet stepped closer. I didn't want to reach out until I was sure it wasn't just guilt. Or nostalgia. Or loneliness. Tessa nodded slowly. And now? Juliet exhaled, eyes never leaving hers. Now I know it's love. Tessa's mouth parted slightly. Her eyes shimmered. Still. Juliet smiled. Always. Tessa closed the space between them in 2 steps. She didn't touch her right away. Just stood in front of her, letting the air between them crackle. Then, carefully, reverently, she reached up and tucked a piece of hair behind Juliet's ear. You're here, she whispered. I'm here, Juliet said. and she leaned forward. Tessa met her halfway. The kiss wasn't rushed. It wasn't explosive. It was slow, aching, full of breath and warmth and every word they hadn't said. When they pulled apart, Juliet rested her forehead against Tessa's. "I tried to feel something with someone else," Tessa whispered, "but my body wouldn't let me. It knew you weren't there." Juliet closed her eyes. "I never stopped being with you, even when I left." Tessa held her tighter. "Then let's go home." And Juliet, this time, didn't flinch. They didn't rush back into anything. That was the first promise they made, whispered against lips still trembling from reunion. No pretending everything had gone untouched by the silence. No erasing the ache they'd lived through. They walked slowly, carefully, like people who knew what it felt like to almost lose something sacred. Juliet didn't sleep over that night. After the kiss, after the long silence on the park bench filled only with hands brushing knuckles and stolen glances, they said goodnight with a tight embrace and the kind of look that holds instead of asks. Juliet went home and sat on her bed for hours, shoes still on, heart loud in her chest. Tessa didn't push. The next day, she sent a single message, "Thinking of you. No rush. I'm here." Juliet responded with a photo of the earrings Tessa had given her, back in her ears. 2 days later, they met again. This time in the studio. Tessa had left the door open for her, like she used to. Juliet stepped inside slowly, inhaling the smell of clay and earth and something warm she hadn't let herself miss too loudly. Tessa was hunched over the wheel, her hands coated in clay, sleeves pushed to the elbows. She didn't speak right away, just smiled when she saw Juliet and went back to working like this was the most natural thing in the world. Juliet watched her for a long time before walking closer. "It's strange," Juliet murmured. "How familiar you are to me, and how far you felt when I pulled away." Tessa didn't look up. "You had to go. I get that now." "I didn't go because I stopped loving you," Juliet added softly. "I left because I didn't know how to stay, when staying meant being seen in the places I hide from." Tessa turned the wheel off, wiped her hands, stepped closer. "I've seen those places. I still love you." Juliet exhaled like she hadn't in weeks. Their second kiss was quieter than the first. Slower, but heavier with the weight of what was returning. This time, Juliet stayed. That night, wrapped in a blanket on Tessa's worn-down couch, Juliet leaned into her shoulder, her voice low. "Can I tell you something without you trying to fix it?" Tessa nodded. "I'm still angry about what Isabel did. And I still feel scared sometimes that loving someone means losing control over my life." "I'm not here to control anything," Tessa said, her voice gentle. "Just to choose you. Every day. Even when you're angry. Even when you're scared." Juliet tilted her face toward her. "What if I pull away again?" "I'll stay still until you find your way back." Juliet kissed her like that promise mattered more than anything else. They didn't make love that night. They lay together, tangled, breathing the same air, holding each other in silence. There was intimacy in that restraint, a different kind of closeness, the kind that said, "I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere." In the morning, Juliet woke to the smell of coffee and the quiet hum of the city outside the window. Tessa was in the kitchen, barefoot, humming a melody Juliet didn't recognize. She walked in slowly, wrapped her arms around Tessa from behind, and pressed her lips to her shoulder. "This feels like beginning again," she whispered. Tessa turned in her arms. "Then let's begin again. As many times as we need." The slow return to each other became its own kind of rhythm, a new language, unspoken but understood. Juliet and Tessa didn't pretend the wounds weren't there. Instead, they traced them carefully, through quiet dinners, early morning coffees, and nights spent half-tangled in each other's arms, breathing the same silence. There was something deeply romantic in the restraint, in the rebuilding. Like they were holding something delicate in their hands, and neither wanted to crush it by moving too fast. But they also started to laugh again. Really laugh. One night, they ended up cooking together in Tessa's kitchen, Juliet barefoot, Tessa in an oversized hoodie, music playing low in the background. Juliet accidentally spilled olive oil all over the counter, and Tessa, trying to catch the bottle, knocked a bowl of chopped onions to the floor. For a second they both froze. Then they burst out laughing, uncontrollably, until Juliet had to sit on the floor and wipe tears from her eyes. Tessa crouched next to her, still giggling, and kissed her cheek through the laughter. "I missed this," Juliet whispered. "So did I," Tessa said, pulling her in. "I missed you like air." That night, they kissed like they'd been waiting all their lives. Not slow this time. Not careful. Full of hunger, longing, and the desperate relief of two people who'd walked through fire and still wanted each other on the other side. They made love slowly, reverently, with hands that remembered and mouths that asked for nothing but yes. It wasn't about perfection. It was about presence. And when it was over, Juliet rested her head on Tessa's chest and whispered, "I didn't know I could want someone like this." Tessa stroked her hair. "You make me feel like everything that came before was practice for you." The next morning, Juliet woke early. She sat by the window wrapped in Tessa's sweater, sipping coffee and watching the sun rise over the city. Tessa joined her silently, sitting behind her, legs on either side, arms wrapped around her waist. "I have something I want to ask you," Juliet said after a while, voice hesitant. Tessa's breath caught slightly. "Okay. I want us to do something together. A project. Something just ours." Tessa tilted her head. "Like what?"
A piece.
"Furniture and ceramic. We design it together. Build it together. Not for anyone else. Just for us." Tessa's smile was slow and warm. "I love that idea. It doesn't have to be big. I want something in the world that only exists because we made it." "Like us," Tessa whispered. "Built slowly. Imperfect, but still standing." They began working on it the next week. After hours in Juliet's workshop, the two of them elbow-deep in dust and glaze, arguing over dimensions and color palettes, covered in clay and varnish and laughter. It wasn't easy. They had different visions, different instincts, and Juliet had to fight her old reflex to do everything herself. But every time she almost snapped or pulled away, Tessa reached for her hand. And Juliet stayed. The piece they created was strange and stunning. A carved wood bench with ceramic inlays, uneven and beautiful, solid and oddly warm to the touch. They signed the bottom together. J and T. The night they finished it, they sat on it together in silence. The studio was dim, the only light coming from the hanging bulbs above. Juliet rested her head on Tessa's shoulder. "We should celebrate," Tessa said softly. Juliet smiled. "We are." "No, I mean really celebrate. Let me take you somewhere." "Where?" "You'll see." The following weekend, Tessa drove them out of the city. Autumn was in full bloom, red leaves spilling across the road, the air cool and sweet. They arrived at a small cabin in the woods. Not Tessa's old one. This one was new to both of them, rented just for the weekend. Quiet, remote.
Perfect.
That night, wrapped in a blanket in front of the fire, Tessa handed Juliet a small wooden box. Inside was a ceramic pendant, delicate and blue-gray like storm clouds. The shape matched one of the inlays they'd used in the bench. "You made this," Juliet whispered. "Our first piece," Tessa said. "I wanted you to have a part of it with you. Always." Juliet's eyes burned. "You're going to ruin me with all this tenderness." Tessa kissed her gently. "Let me." The cabin felt like a world outside time. No notifications. No obligations. Just them. The fire crackled softly through the night, and the pendant Tessa had given Juliet rested against her chest like a promise, small, beautiful, and solid. They spent the weekend doing everything and nothing. Mornings were quiet and lazy. Juliet curled under the covers while Tessa brewed coffee and sang under her breath in the kitchen. Afternoons brought long walks through the woods behind the cabin, their hands brushing, catching, holding. And nights were full of soft kisses, long silences, and laughter that bloomed from nowhere. One evening, they cooked together with one speaker playing music from Juliet's phone. The song shifted, faded into something slow and familiar. Tessa looked up from where she was chopping herbs. I know this one. Juliet nodded, stirring the pot. My mom used to dance to it in the living room, alone, barefoot, always like no one was watching. Tessa wiped her hands on a towel and walked over. Will you dance with me? Juliet hesitated. There's no one here to see. That's exactly why I want to. So they danced.
Slowly.
Juliet's arms around Tessa's neck, Tessa's hands at Juliet's waist, their bodies moving in a quiet rhythm only they could hear. Tessa leaned in. I didn't think I'd get this. Not really. I wanted it, but I didn't think I was allowed. Juliet rested her cheek against her shoulder. Me neither. I thought people like me were meant to be admired from a distance, not loved up close. Tessa pulled back just enough to look at her. You're not just loved. You're seen. Every inch of you. Juliet felt her throat tighten. She wasn't used to this kind of vulnerability, not without fear. But somehow, with Tessa, it didn't feel like falling. It felt like finally landing. Later that night, they sat on the porch wrapped in a blanket, their feet propped on the railing, stars above them burning quietly. Juliet took a sip of wine and then passed the glass to Tessa. I don't want this to be temporary, she said softly. It's not. I mean, I don't want to go back to just weekends. Just visits. Just catching moments between responsibilities. Tessa turned to her, gaze soft. I don't either. So, let's change it.
Tessa blinked.
Are you saying what I think you're saying? Juliet laughed under her breath. I'm saying I want to come home to you. Or have you come home to me? I want to wake up and fight over who uses the shower first and argue about groceries and kiss you in the doorway before work. I want a life with you. Tessa set the glass down and reached for her hand. I never thought anyone would want to build something like that with me. I don't just want to build it, Juliet said. I want to stay in it. Even when it creaks. Even when it leaks. Even when it feels too quiet or too loud. I want all of it. Tessa kissed her, slowly, deeply, like saying yes with her whole body. They lay together that night, their limbs tangled, breaths matching, hearts calm. There was no fear left. No question marks. Just this steady, growing certainty that they were building something that could hold them both. The next morning, Juliet rolled over in bed, tucked her face into Tessa's neck, and whispered, Let's do it. Move in together? Juliet nodded. Let's stop making space for doubt. Let's just choose this. Tessa grinned against her skin. Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's build a life. They packed up the cabin later that day with hands that lingered in each other's touch, laughing over who forgot to bring the wine cork and who burned the first batch of breakfast. There was no urgency, no fear of what came next, because next was theirs to shape. Moving in together wasn't dramatic. It wasn't marked by a grand gesture or a perfect plan. It was Juliet showing up to Tessa's apartment with 2 boxes and a coffee in hand, saying, I think this is the first load, and Tessa replying, then I guess this is really happening. It was that simple, that soft, that steady. The process was chaotic in the way only love could be. Half-packed boxes, bubble wrap everywhere, Juliet arguing with Tessa about what counted as essential. You don't need 7 different ladles. They're different shapes and they all matter. And a drawer full of tangled cords they both swore weren't theirs. Still, through the mess and mismatched habits, there was laughter. There was music playing while they painted a bedroom wall at midnight, barefoot and covered in specks of blue. There were small discoveries that made them pause. The way Juliet always folded her socks perfectly, or how Tessa couldn't sleep without the faint buzz of a fan in the background. The first week brought adjustment. Juliet liked early mornings, her coffee black, her silence respected until 9 a.m. Tessa liked slow wake-ups, humming in the kitchen, and adding cinnamon to everything. But they found each other in the middle, Juliet pouring a second cup of coffee just the way Tessa liked it, Tessa staying quiet until Juliet looked up from her mug and said, Okay, I'm human now. They began to build rituals. Sunday nights became stay-in nights, blankets on the floor, takeout containers, and a different movie genre every week. Wednesdays were for working side by side in Juliet's shop, Tessa sketching with her headphones in, Juliet sanding or staining something with her brows furrowed and hands steady. Even in silence, they were company. One evening, as Juliet was fixing a loose hinge on a cabinet in their shared kitchen, she paused, leaned back on her heels, and just stared at Tessa. She was standing by the stove, stirring something, swaying slightly to the music playing low in the background. Juliet didn't speak. She just watched. Tessa noticed eventually. "What?" she asked with a crooked smile. Juliet shook her head. "Nothing. You just look like home." Tessa walked over and knelt down next to her. "That's funny," she said, "because I was just thinking the same thing about you." Their kiss was soft, familiar. Juliet tasted cinnamon and honey and something so deep it made her heart ache. But not every moment was easy. One Saturday, Tessa's old landlord called. Some final issue with a deposit, something about damage that wasn't hers. The call dragged up old frustrations, and when she hung up, her mood soured. Juliet, tired from a long day, made a joke that didn't land, and suddenly they were snapping at each other in the hallway over nothing. "I'm not your ex, Tessa," Juliet said, voice tight. "I know that," Tessa snapped. "But sometimes it feels like I have to walk on eggshells around you when you get quiet." Juliet flinched. "I'm quiet because I'm trying not to say something I'll regret." They stood there, breathing hard, silence stretched tight between them. Then Tessa sighed. "I'm sorry. That wasn't fair." Juliet's shoulders dropped. "I don't want to fight with you. I don't want us to be afraid of small things turning into big things." Juliet stepped closer. "Then let's agree, no going to bed angry. No pretending everything's fine when it's not. If it hurts, we say so. If we're scared, we admit it." Tessa nodded. "And if we mess up? We stay," Juliet whispered. "We stay and figure it out." They ended the night curled up on the couch, Juliet's head on Tessa's lap, Tessa's fingers tracing slow circles on her arm. "This is the part no one talks about," Tessa murmured. "After the happy ending. The part where you choose love over and over, even when it's messy." Juliet looked up at her. "I don't want a love that only survives in perfect light. I want one that holds up in the dark too." Tessa smiled. "Then we're doing this right." And as the lights dimmed and the city quieted outside their windows, they held each other through the soft, imperfect stillness of a life they were finally building together. The seasons shifted slowly. Autumn bled into winter, and their apartment filled with little signs of life together. Coats overlapping on the same hook, 2 toothbrushes in a single cup, coffee mugs neither remembered buying but both refused to throw away. Tessa's scarves began showing up in Juliet's closet, and Juliet's tools found a permanent corner in Tessa's studio. Their worlds, once parallel, had folded into one. And not just in objects, but in habits. Juliet, once fiercely private, now left notes on the mirror in the mornings. Tessa, who used to work in silence, now kept Juliet's favorite playlists running in the background. They were learning each other in new, quieter ways. And yet, love never stopped surprising them. On a Sunday morning in late December, Juliet woke to find Tessa missing from the bed. She reached instinctively for the pillow still warm beside her, blinking sleep from her eyes. She heard the soft rustle of paper in the other room, the kettle boiling, the low hum of Tessa's voice singing something off-key. Juliet wrapped herself in a sweater and padded barefoot to the kitchen. Tessa stood at the counter, flower on her cheek, notebook open. Completely focused on a recipe, she was clearly improvising. Juliet leaned in the doorway, arms crossed, smiling. "Are you making a mess or a masterpiece?" Tessa turned, a little breathless, a little disheveled, and more beautiful than Juliet had ever seen her. "Both." Juliet crossed the room slowly, reaching out to brush a bit of flour from her jaw. "I love this," she whispered. "Waking up with you. Starting days like this." Tessa met her eyes. "I want this forever." Juliet paused. Her breath caught. Forever's a big word. Tessa stepped closer. "So is love. But I'm not afraid of either." Juliet smiled, eyes suddenly burning. "I never thought I'd be someone who got to have this." Tessa cupped her face gently. "You are. You always were." Later that day, Bundled in coats and scarves, they walked through the local winter market. Snow had started to fall, light, quiet, softening the sounds of the city. They moved slowly, fingers interlaced, stopping occasionally to admire something handmade or taste something warm. At one stall, a woman sold delicate glass ornaments. Tessa picked up one shaped like a small house. "It looks like us," she said with a smile. Juliet took it from her hands, turned it over carefully, and then reached into her pocket. "I was going to wait," Juliet said, pulling out a tiny velvet pouch. "But now feels right." Inside was a ring. Simple.
Silver.
Engraved on the inside. "Still choosing you." Tessa's breath hitched. Juliet took her hand. "This isn't a proposal. Not yet. It's a promise. A reminder that no matter what, I'm here. Choosing this. Choosing you." Tessa blinked fast, laughing through the tears. "I love you so much it hurts." Juliet slipped the ring onto her finger. Then let it hurt. Let it be big and terrifying and real. Tessa pulled her into a kiss, right there in the middle of the market, as snow drifted around them and music played from a distant speaker. That night, back home, they curled on the couch under one blanket, sipping wine and watching the snow fall outside their window. The apartment glowed with soft lights, the scent of pine and cinnamon hanging in the air. Juliet rested her head on Tessa's shoulder. "Do you remember what I said when we first met?" "You said you weren't the kind of woman people date." Juliet smiled. "I was wrong." Tessa kissed her hair. "You're the kind people fall for." "Completely." "No," Juliet whispered. "I'm the kind of woman you fall for. And that's all I ever want to be." They sat in silence, hearts full, the room wrapped in warmth. Love, real love, had taken time, had asked them to break, to rebuild, to stay. And now it was here.
Steady. Soft.
Unshakable. Not a perfect ending.
Just the right one.
If you enjoyed this content and want to support the channel in a special way, try clicking the thanks button below. It's the one with the heart and $sign icon. With super thanks, you can make a direct contribution to the channel, which helps me keep creating awesome videos for you.